I'd say 55 and older ought to consider meeting with an elder law attorney, even just for general estate planning purposes. Let me give you an example, something as simple as a power of attorney. A lot of people think those are template documents that you can download off the internet for free and you'll be fine. And what happens is often what the case is, these documents you find online for free, they're fine documents. I mean, I've seen plenty online that are perfectly fine, but for a limited purpose, right? So it's good for things like going to the bank. It may even be good for things like dealing with your real estate. But where they often fail is where you need more advanced planning.
Hey y'all, this is Kosta, and today I'm here with my guest, Jason Neufeld, elder law attorney and partner at Elder Needs Law. Jason currently serves on the Miami Mayor's Initiative in Aging and also the Academy of Florida Elder Law Attorneys and the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Today we're talking about why you need an elder law attorney. So, Jason, let's start with the basics. What is elder law?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kosta, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show. And it's a great question because elder law is really more than one thing. Elder law is an umbrella term for different disciplines in the legal field. So there's some areas of elder law that your listeners and viewers are undoubtedly familiar with, right? There's wills and trusts and powers of attorney, right? Estate planning and capacity planning, and we do a lot of that. There's probate, right? What happens to your assets after you pass away if you haven't done a lot of pre-planning, right? A lot of people are familiar with that. And then there's some areas of elder law that are less well known. For example, Medicaid planning, which is kind of what we're known for in the state of Florida. The idea behind Medicaid planning is long-term care, very expensive. Most people, a lot of people are worried about, creditors and bankruptcy and things like that. And statistically speaking, the biggest threat to our clients' financial livelihood is the threat of long-term care. And what we're able to do as Medicaid planning attorneys is legally and ethically protect their assets and get them access to their state Medicaid program that will allow them to receive care in the home, care in an assisted living facility, or care in a nursing home, where normally you'd have to go broke first before you qualified. So we want to step in there before they become broke to get access to those services. Mm-hmm.
So we talked to someone in New York that also did Medicaid planning, and I'd love to hear how the process, if you can go into detail, works in Florida, specifically around Medicaid planning.
Yeah, and it's a really important question because while Medicaid is a state and federal partnership. So what happens is on a federal level, Medicaid sets these parameters that the states can work within. And what that means is in Florida, what we have to do to get someone eligible for Medicaid is going to be much different than someone in New York and most other states. And in fact, we have interesting strategies and planning tools that aren't available in New York and vice versa. Okay. So essentially the idea is we take certain assets that are countable, right? In Florida, you can't have more than $2,000 to your name. So, a lot of people are going, I'm not a Rockefeller, but I certainly have more than $2,000, right?
Middle class, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I tell people. I go, if you're indigent, you already qualify for these programs. Mm-hmm. If you're ultra wealthy, you privately pay. It's everyone in the middle who kind of gets the short end of it. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing really is we're taking assets that are above the $2,000 and are countable, and we're converting them into assets that are not countable. So our clients can lead a higher quality of life, make it more so they have more to draw upon while they're alive, and then make it more likely that they'll have something to pass on to their heirs. And that's essentially what we're doing.
Do you use like a combination of living trusts or some type of... Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So there's more, I tell people there's more than one way to skin the cat, and everything we do has pros and cons. I don't have, people go, what's the trust I can put everything into and then, without any drawbacks, and that will let me qualify for Medicaid and let me keep everything. And I don't have that available. I don't think anybody does. And if they do, I'm certainly open to learning more about it. But where there's a combination of strategies that really depend on the individual, right? There's not a cookie cutter solution to everyone's problems. It's let's talk about your goals. Let's talk about how your financial accounts are situated, right? 401ks are treated differently than non-tax qualified brokerage accounts.
Okay.
So we're treating the assets differently, and then we're coming up with a combination of strategies to minimize those drawbacks.
And I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I am curious, does Florida have a look-back period as well as other states?
Yeah, and I love that you asked that because, yes, Florida does. We have a 5-year look-back period, but that doesn't mean what people think, right? The 5-year look-back period is, the idea behind it is Medicaid does not want applicants giving away assets within 5 years of applying for Medicaid. And if you do, then they're going to penalize you for that.
Right.
But most of my clients don't have 5 years to plan. If they do, that's great. A small fraction do have 5 years to plan, and we have kind of a different suite of solutions for those people who have the wherewithal to plan in advance. But most of my clients, 90% of them, want Medicaid tomorrow or in the very near future. They don't have 5 years. So my strategies are legally and ethically getting money out of my client's name in a way that is not considered to be a gift, and therefore doesn't trigger that 5-year look-back period.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I want to touch on one last thing before we move on. And we talked about it briefly before we started the show. Can you talk a little bit about how elder abuse falls into the category of elder law?
Yeah, it's another branch on the elder law tree that some attorneys have their entire practice focused on elder abuse type cases. So where our clients are going to find traction is in a few different scenarios. One of them is if their financial advisor or an insurance agent has sold them something that was really inappropriate for someone of their age or means, there is recourse against these large institutions where, if someone's been financially abused, we can take the case typically on a contingency fee, meaning the client doesn't come out of pocket to pay us for it. We can go after the institution because we know that if we think it's a good case, we can get the money back. The other way people can find good representation is if they were injured due to the result of a facility's negligence, right? If they're in a nursing home or an assisted living facility and they were not attended to, and you commonly see bed sores, pressure ulcers, and sometimes they're falling because they're supposed to be attended to, and sometimes they're not. Then you can go after those facilities as well. Where people are often disappointed, I'm sorry to say, is, and this is the example I gave to you before, is sometimes they call me up and they go, Uncle Vinny stole money. He had power of attorney and he stole money from me and I want to sue him. So where we can help is we can certainly change the power of attorney so Uncle Vinny can't do any more damage. But it's harder to find an attorney willing to sue Uncle Vinny because he probably doesn't have the money anymore, right? You can't get blood from a stone. So I mean, there are certainly cases where that's not the case, but by and large, suing individuals is very difficult to do. So what we are recommending to our clients is a few things. The first is you, of course, call the police, right? Because the police can go after criminally charge them. And there's almost every state has a statute that says if you're charged of stealing, you can get usually more than what was stolen returned to you by order of the criminal judge. And then there's also, most states have what's called a long-term care ombudsman, which is a free government advocacy service that can help investigate these things as well. So I'm often referring to those resources as well.
Nice. So we talked about all the different parts of elder law. In your opinion, will most people need an elder law attorney at some point in their life?
Yeah, and the sooner the better. I'd say people who are in their, 55 and older ought to consider meeting with an elder law attorney, even just for general estate planning purposes. Let me give you an example. Something as simple as a power of attorney. A lot of people think those are template documents that you can download off the internet for free and you'll be fine. And what happens is often what the case is, these documents you find online for free, they're fine documents. I mean, I've seen plenty online that are perfectly fine, but for a limited purpose, right? So
I
it's good
see.
for things like going to the bank. It may even be good for things like dealing with your real estate. But where they often fail is where you need more advanced planning, right?
Okay.
So for example, creating special needs trusts. I see these form documents fail all the time. Doing things that benefits the agent, right? The agent is the one you empower to make decisions on your behalf. And in Florida, at least, you can't say, I give my agent the ability to do everything for me, so help me God. And you can't be that
Right.
broad. You have to be
Of course.
very, very specific. And if it's not specific enough, and if certain things aren't initialed properly, they just can't do it. So we have people who come to me very confident. They go, I'm here to help out my mother or my father who needs help with long-term care, and they have $200,000 worth of assets that we'd like to protect. And unfortunately, they've lost their mind, right? They've lost their capacity to make decisions for themselves, which is why you get a power of attorney in the first place. And they send me this one-page form or a two-page form that I know they download. I got the same 3 forms I see circulated over and over again. And I have to be the bearer of bad news and say, listen, this is fine for going to the bank, but we have more advanced, complex things we need to do that this document just isn't good enough. And so we have to go to court now. It's called guardianship, or sometimes in other states it's called a conservatorship, where you get a judge to say, hey, now this person can make decisions for the incapacitated individual. But that costs a lot more money than just getting a good, well-drafted power of attorney by someone who's thinking about these long-term care type issues. I see the problem with other types of attorneys as well, where, again, it's a perfectly fine document for maybe your needs and my needs, right? Our kind of our day-to-day living. But as we're talking about long-term care-related issues, these documents that are provided by non-elder law attorneys or inexperienced estate planning attorneys may not be good enough to do the trick. So that's why, I know a very long-winded answer, but elder law is more important than you think. Even when you don't need specifically long-term care service, it's good to start thinking about these kinds of issues.
How long did it take you to really sort of not just find your niche, but also really understand the complexity of elder law, the Medicaid system? And I mean, literally in the last 20 to 25 years, the system's changed like 5 times, if not more.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been very involved with the elder law bar for quite a while now. So you mentioned that I'm on the board of directors of the Academy of Florida Elder Law Attorneys. So we go to the conferences, and I actually teach at these conferences as well. But when I go there, I'm also learning. So I'm both a teacher and a student, where there's updates in the law for in very specific, nuanced areas that other attorneys specialize in, and I learn from listening to them. So how long did it take me? They call it the practice of law for a reason, right? We never truly master. We're always trying to get better and better. So I make education a priority for myself and my staff and the attorneys who work with me. I want us to be on the forefront of all of this. I would say, if I had to guess, a good 4 to 5 years to really feel like I had a true control over this. There's always a learning curve, and I remember when I first started out, probably 10 years ago, 9 years ago, something like that, doing elder law, the first few cases you co-counsel with another more experienced attorney, and that's kind of how you learn these things. But fortunately, I feel pretty confident. I've written my own book on the subject. Again, I teach other attorneys this stuff, so feel pretty good about my knowledge base at this point.
I like that. So aside from power of attorneys, what do you think is the greatest misconception that people have about elder law, but also estate planning? Yeah.
So elder law, I would say that 5-year look back period is a big one that we talked about a lot. Some people come into this thinking to themselves, I can't do anything because I don't have 5 years to plan. And I have really sad stories. One that I talk about a lot, it must have been about 4 years ago now, where there were 2 sisters. One of them had capacity and was taking care of her unwell sister. And she called me up and said, I would have called you sooner, but I know there's a 5-year look back period. So I've sold my sister's house and we're down to her last $5,000. And so now
Wow.
what can we do? And I said, I'm so sorry that you thought that. I wish you came to me sooner because we didn't have to sell the house. We had ways
Mm-hmm.
of protecting the house. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to burn through all of your sister's cash, but they think 5 years, I can't do anything within 5 years, which is simply not the case.
And
Yeah,
sorry, no,
go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. Keep going, please.
I was going to say another big misconception is people say, are they don't like, they feel like we're hiding something from the government, right? I started out with $250,000, the beginning of this month, and then I
Sure.
ended up with $2,000 after we've done all of our planning and situated the money where what's in the client's best interest. And then we're applying, saying our client only has $2,000. Let's give us these benefits. And people, that sits uneasy for some people,
Right.
where they say, I don't want to hide things. And I am very quick to tell people, I go, I really enjoy practicing law, and I would never do anything to jeopardize the license. I'm not hiding anything from the government. In fact, I'm disclosing it all. I'm disclosing all the income sources. I'm disclosing all of the assets, and I'm telling the government exactly what we did and why, under state and federal laws, they still have to give my client access to benefits. I liken it to, if you had $20 million, you would go to a tax attorney and say, how can I legally and ethically pay as little in taxes as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And they
Absolutely.
would, run you through that process. I'm doing the same thing for middle class folks.
Yeah. And I think you just nailed it right there at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. It's incomprehensible for us to think that there can't be some form of relief for people that are middle class to be able to have something like long-term care that is an inevitability and is extremely expensive. Because if this was not here, then literally people would be poor at the end of their life.
right.
But more importantly, they wouldn't have any type of inheritance or any type of money or assets to pass on to their kids and their loved ones. You can't build any generational wealth.
You're 100% correct. And I'll tell you, Kosta, you hit the nail on the head, because too many people, I say my biggest challenge is educating Floridians that what I do exists.
Right.
I've been in rooms full of attorneys and they didn't know that what I did existed. So there's this, it's like the best kept secret, and I don't exactly know why, which is why I make it my mission to come on shows like this and go speak in front of groups, because I want to educate people that there is something to do. You don't have to wait and just spend everything and lose all of you've worked your whole life for. There's ways to protect it for yourself. First and foremost, it's for my client, right? I want them to have the highest quality of life possible. And then a second priority, of course, is passing it on to the next generation.
Yeah. And you would think that the federal government or the state governments would do some type of PSA, but maybe one day we'll see something like that,
Yeah.
Just something as simple as saying Medicare does not pay for long-term care would move literal mountains. You know what I'm saying?
You're right. You're absolutely right. We get that all the time where people go, I have the best Medicare supplement money can buy. And I go, that gets you 100 days in a skilled nursing facility, and that's it. It's not paying for ALF care, and maybe it pays for a little bit of home health care for a very limited period of time, but not very much. Not very much. It runs out very quickly.
So in your practice, what are some of the most common scenarios clients find themselves in? And what I mean by that is, like, what type of disabilities are they working through? And I'm curious kind of to know, like, what their dynamics are versus or regarding their family members. Like, for example, do you feel like this is usually their kids that are coming to you, or are they themselves coming to you, a spouse, things like that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think I should point out, elder law attorneys are not just for the elderly.
Okay.
So we represent people of all ages. If they're over the age of 18, it's like a different Medicaid program if you're under the age of 18. But if you're over the age of 18 and have a disability that requires long-term care, we help those people out as well. So, for example, recently I represented a married couple. The husband had early onset Parkinson's. He was young 50s. and came down with Parkinson's. And he gets saying, listen, it's getting to the point where I'm having trouble taking care of myself, and it's kind of a burden on my wife to take. It's hard for her to lift me. It's hard for her to feed me. It's hard, things like that. And we were able to get him onto what's called the Medicaid waiver program in Florida to get home health care to help out him and his wife. And he'll have that for the rest of his life. And if he needs to be in a facility, it will follow him into the facility. And so you don't have to be elderly necessarily. So it's a good, to more directly answer your question, I would say most often, the vast majority of our clients are going to be in their 70s, 80s, 90s, something like that. And most of the time we're dealing with their spouse who is well and is caring for their significant other, or we're dealing with their adult children. Who have the power of attorney. And by the way, I'm looking at those adult children. I'm saying, listen, you need long-term care insurance because I don't know what Medicaid's going to be like in 20 or 30 years from now. I know what it is now, and it's a really nice service now, but nothing beats cash. And if you can get long-term care insurance while you're young and healthy, that's going to be the best, right? That's better than anything.
Absolutely. But the smoking gun is, do they listen to you? You know what I mean?
I'll tell you, we have just recently, we started an insurance agency as well. It's called Elder Needs Insurance to complement Elder Needs Law. And my partner in that, he's not an attorney, but he's in he helps people find good Medicare supplement or Medicare Advantage plans. And he also does a lot with life insurance and long-term care insurance. And I say, don't meet with my guy, right? I don't care. Just get it done by anyone. If you have a relationship with someone else, go get it done with them. Getting long-term care insurance it can be expensive, but probably not as bad as you think, especially if you bundle it in with a life insurance policy, but explore it. And you're right. I think your instinct is most of them say, no, I'm just here to talk about mom and dad. I'll think about myself later on.
Yeah.
And they don't do it. And, we try to educate as best we can, but we can't force them to do anything.
I was talking to a long-term care insurance agent out of, I think it was North Carolina, and she was explaining how long-term care insurance has to be part of every single person's estate planning. So when you do a will and trust, or when you're planning for retirement, that needs to be a major focal point, because one of the things that people don't know is that you have a 70% chance of needing long-term care after you turn 65, before end of life. And so it is an inevitability, and I think the faster people realize that, the better.
Yeah, and it's becoming harder and harder to find those policies. My joke, my parents have this amazing long-term care policy that is kind of unlimited coverage that they've been paying into since the 90s. And I keep telling them, I go, I don't care what you do, but you continue paying for that policy. You can't get that anymore. You can't get that anymore. So now, for example, what's popular, because it's a lot more affordable, is you buy your life insurance with what's called a long-term care rider. And as you get older, it allows you to access your death benefit before you pass away.
I see.
To pay for long-term care needs. And then, so I like that because no matter what, someone's going to benefit from the policy, right? If you're alive and need long-term care, you have this pot of money to draw from. And if you pass away and you don't need long-term care before the money runs out, then your significant other, your children, can benefit from the life insurance. So no matter what, it's good for whatever your needs, whatever might come in your world. It's a helpful policy to have.
Well, and we're about to get into estate planning and probate and things like that, but I wanted to also say that if you have a long-term care insurance policy, you can skip the Medicaid part, like the cumbersome part of having to rely on Medicaid. And then also, and I don't want to completely answer the next question with the statement, but I think it's important in case I forget it. When you have Medicaid, usually, well, at least in Tennessee, I'm not sure if it's in Florida, but I'm pretty sure Florida works the same way. You lose some of the control of being able to dictate how your care is provided. Like, they have obviously this choice that they allow you to have. You can pick your agency and things like that. But a lot of times those agencies have to be Medicaid providers. So they go through the licensure process and the contracting process, and the facilities have to be Medicaid facilities. Well, here's the thing. A lot of assisted living facilities don't take Medicaid. You have to pay for it out of pocket. And sometimes to access those assisted living facilities, or there's those independent retirement communities, you have to pay for them out of pocket. And those types of dynamics, in my opinion, mirror a lot more of kind of the aging in place model, but with a lot more supports. So.
Yeah, in Florida, the way it works is every single nursing home in the state must accept Medicaid if they accept Medicare, which 99.9% of them do. So that's really good, because the Cadillac of people think of, I'm going to be in a Medicaid nursing home and that's going to be this dump. Well, hopefully you're not going to one of those facilities, but the Cadillac of nursing homes will accept Medicaid. That's really good. Yeah. Assisted living facilities, you're absolutely correct. They have the choice whether they want to accept Medicaid or not. In Florida, there are plenty of very nice facilities that do, because from their perspective, it's just money. Sure. In Florida, but Medicaid won't pay the full bill. Medicaid puts somewhere between, depending on where you are in the state, between $1,300 and $1,600 toward that bill. Same. Those facilities on the low end are $2,500 a month, which might be fine, but on the high end, more like at $6,500 a month. So even with Medicaid, it might not be enough to cover the assisted living facility. Another really important reason why we want to protect those assets. And then from home care, you're absolutely right. You pick an agency that contracts with Medicaid, and if you don't like them, you can fire them, but you're limited to who the Medicaid organization has contracted with.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, at what age should someone consult an elder law attorney to start planning for things like Medicaid, probate, and estate planning?
Yeah, estate planning. So I think if you are, if you own my barometer or rule of thumb is if you own property, or if you're married with a child, you need to do some estate planning, and we do a ton of generic estate planning as well. It's not necessarily when you're young, we're not necessarily talking about Medicaid planning, but we're doing things like the power of attorney. God forbid you get into a car accident and you become disabled, even though you're young, you need long-term care. We have the power of attorney that your loved one, whoever you designate, can go through the machinations to get you eligible for Medicaid should that be needed. But generally speaking, that's not people's big concern. Their big concern is avoiding probate, making sure that they've chosen who is going to be the guardian of their child should one or both parents pass away, who can make healthcare decisions for that child if the parents are temporarily incapacitated. So that's their primary focus. And so we're doing a lot of planning surrounding a revocable trust. Sometimes it's called a living trust, revocable living trust, all kind of terms that mean the exact same thing. And so we're doing that because assets in a trust don't have to go to court. They don't have to go through the probate court process. And it's easy to turn the reins over to your assets for whoever it is you trust to do what's right for you or your children. So there's no, most of my clients who come to me for generic estate planning are going to be in their 30s, 40s, 50s. And then once they start getting to their late 50s or 60s, we start to think about Medicaid planning. For example, my people who know they have a family history of Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or a history of stroke and things like that. They have these kind of genetic predisposition to things happening that will require long-term care. Then we talk about, if it's not needed immediately or not needed within 5 years, we're talking about an irrevocable trust, where we're kind of getting money out of their name in advance of needing care, because essentially after 5 years, money in this irrevocable trust is invisible as far as Medicaid is concerned. So those are probably my healthy 70, probably 70 to 80 is probably the sweet spot. My people who are kind of a healthy 70 or a healthy 80, those are the people who are going to be most interested, or even a little bit younger if they know they're predisposed to these sorts of ailments that will require long-term care.
So obviously you're in Florida, and if I ever end up living in Florida, I definitely know who to call for estate planning.
Yep.
But like with me being in Tennessee now, and a lot of the audience is also most likely from out of state and don't live in
Sure.
Florida, what
Sure.
tips can you give us for finding a qualified and knowledgeable elder law attorney in our area?
Yeah, I think for sure you want to go to NAELA.org. That's NAELA.org, which stands for the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Any elder law attorney who's worth their salt is going to be a member of that organization. That's the kind of the preeminent elder law organization in the country. And if you go to that website, very prominently featured is a find a lawyer, and you can enter in your zip code, and it'll give you a list of attorneys who are near you. And you can interview, as many as you want. You find someone who you click with, and again, elder law attorneys focus on different things. So if it's Medicaid, you want to find someone who has demonstrated some knowledge and a deep commitment to Medicaid planning. And then some people are just more interested in estate planning, and that's okay too. And there are other attorneys who are focused more on the estate planning side of things.
Very good. So before we finish, I have one more very important question. Okay. If you could share one unavoidable truth when it comes to long-term care planning and securing your estate, what would it be?
It's you're not invincible. It is these things can happen. It's not, sometimes long-term care happens in a predictable manner, right? We all are going to slow down as we get older. We are, ultimately, like you said, 70% of us are going to need long-term care. Don't think you're special. I'm not special. You're not special. Your viewers aren't special. We all age. We all are going to need help at some point in time. So sticking your head in the sand is not a good way to go about doing anything, and especially that applies doubly to long-term care planning. So having a plan in advance is only going to be to your benefit. Don't do your estate planning yourself. It is not a DIY project. Don't go to the websites that make you pay, $20 to get a full suite of documents. You're going to get what you pay for. Meet with at the very least, someone who specializes in estate planning. And if you're concerned about long-term care, you're going to want to meet with an elder law attorney, even if you don't consider yourself elderly. I promise we deal with lots of people who aren't elderly, even as an elder law attorney. So I think that is the unavoidable truth is, plan in advance. Don't think it's not going to happen to you, because ultimately it happens to many people who no one wants to be a burden on their children.
Of course.
And there's a lot of that going on, unfortunately, because people aren't choosing to plan in advance.
Do you think that we're starting to turn the tide in the right direction?
I hope so. I mean, I think I'm seeing if the busyness of our office is any indication, we're seeing more people inquire, more people. Good. Again, I try to. The reason why I wrote the book, the reason I give out, anyone who wants my, I have these booklets that I put together, and I just hand them out like candy. I want everyone to just consume this knowledge, and it's all. So I'm hoping that it's all practical information. I mean, like you, I have a YouTube channel where I answer people's very specific questions, and by the way, I know I'm educating other elder law attorneys as well. I'm okay with that. I want people to I want to disseminate the good knowledge, right? And if it's not with me, if you want to go to, your sister-in-law who's an elder law attorney, please do it. Just seek help from somebody. I don't care if it's me, just get help from somebody so that you're not going at this alone. It's
just so pervasive. And if you don't have, the knowledge and the support, you're literally just feel like you're complete fish out of water, and there's no kind of light at the end of the tunnel. What is the book, and where can people buy it?
I just so happen to have a copy right here.
All right.
So it's How to Get Medicaid to Pay for Some or All of Your Long-Term Care Expenses Without Having to Wait 5 years, without having to sell your house, without having to go broke first. A Florida Medicaid Lawyer's Guide for Non-Lawyers. I wrote it for the layman. It's not a treatise. It's not complicated. It's only about 100 pages long, and it's available on Amazon.com.
Fantastic. So we always like to end the show with a call to action. What's your best advice for someone entering the long-term care industry as a patient, a caregiver, or as an industry professional?
It is, you don't have to do it, especially if you're a caregiver or a patient or someone who needs the care. You don't have to go at it alone. There are support groups all over the place, and you can get a lot of great information. I make it a point to speak at different caregiver support groups multiple times a year because I know, I kind of joke, but it's not really. They're the true heroes, right? I mean,
Absolutely,
these are people who are, it's their, their parent or their grandparent or their brother or sister or their child has no one else that they can count on, and this person is it. And oftentimes they're burnt out because they suffer in silence. And I want people to know they don't have to do that. They really don't have to do that. If you are a professional getting involved in the business, there are different. Go help these support groups out. Donate your time, donate your energy, and of course there are loads of senior-oriented networking groups that it's a bunch of people from a variety of different disciplines. Not most of them aren't legal or or financial. They're kind of the full gamut, the full spectrum of care that's provided for senior citizens. And go and meet your peers because you're going to be able to help each other out and help your community be a better, safer, nicer place for the elderly or the disabled.
Jason, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on and sharing all your wisdom. And I think that we got a lot of great information here that's going to help a lot of people.
Kosta, I've loved being here. Really, thank you for having me.